Welcome to Just the Worst Podcast, episode number 25, to be perfectly precise. I am your host, Billy Donnelly, who you can find at JoeBlow.com. This is Infamous, and right here at Just the Worst Podcast. And as we do every single week, we talk movies, what's going on in Hollywood, the Hollywood landscape, sort of the biggest news that's out there, putting it into perspective, and also offering up what I think is a pretty educated and sensible opinion to maybe help change your perceptions, or maybe just help introduce another facet into the conversation, into the dialogue, give you something new to think about, some food for thought as we discuss the major things that are sort of coming out of Hollywood on any given particular week. This week, I got two major things that I want to talk about. Number one is going to be the Academy Awards. I'm going to push that back towards the back end of the show, though, because I got something a little bit more pressing that I want to get to right here on the front end. So, Oscars, you're going to have to go and sit on the shelf, which is a convenient place for you, given where you're typically positioned anyway, just for a little while. I'll get to the Oscars, the 88th Annual Academy Awards, a little bit later in the show. But kicking off this particular episode, what I really want to dive into is Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film. Now, I was originally set to record this show about a day earlier, and I chose to push it back on the timing for one good reason, and that is that today, the day that I am recording, we were set, scheduled, and ready to get our very first look at Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film. We were going to get the very first trailer for the Ghostbusters film. A film, or a trailer rather, that seems to be rather late in the game, considering the film comes out in July. It seems like a lot of the summer movies we've at least gotten some taste of to this point, including the Suicide Squad, which doesn't come out until August. So there are films around that time that we have already sort of gotten an idea of what they look like, how they feel, something to raise awareness that the film is coming later this year. Ghostbusters from Sony Pictures, on the other hand, has really sort of been played close to the vest. We haven't really gotten much outside of some still photos along the way. I got some teaser one-sheets along the way, but that's about it. So whether it's tone, whether it is style, whether it is visuals, whether or not it's the comedy sensibilities, to this point, we've got nothing. Nothing at all. And as a result, the vacuum has sort of been filled by fans' and or non-fans' perception of a movie they know very little about. Now, before I get into the contents of the trailer and ultimately the reaction to said trailer, I want to preface my discussion with Paul Feig's Ghostbusters with sort of where I've been on this particular film to this particular point. I have been a pretty staunch defender of Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film. Okay, while I understand there is sort of this idea that Ghostbusters is a sacred property that should never be touched or remade or rebooted or altered in any way, shape, or form, that's just not reality. It's not realistic. And the faster people come to grips with that, the better off a lot of us will be in the long term. Just earlier today, right after the trailer was dropped, somebody I know told me, well, why doesn't Sony just continue making the video games and leave the remakes or the reboots alone? And the simple answer is because they just don't make enough fucking money. Sony Pictures is in the business of making movies that they believe will earn them a profit. That they believe that a paying general public will lay out money to go see. And just because you may not like it, it may not speak to you or look appealing to you, does not mean that there aren't other people who will pay money to go see it and enjoy it. So to this point, I've been on the ship that A, Sony is well within their rights to make whatever the fuck movie it is that they want to with the Ghostbusters title. But on top of that, it has been incredibly unfair to criticize this film just on the fact that you have problems with its very existence. Because to this point, once again, and let me stress, we have not seen one goddamn thing from this film. Not in motion, not in context, nothing. We've seen still images of the car. We've seen still images of the characters, still images of the Ghostbusters suits, still images of the proton packs, and that is about it. So to look at that, any of that, and say, oh, well, this looks like shit. There's a real problem with that. A, it just once again shows fanboys' ridiculous standards by hating on something way ahead of time without ever having taken a fair look at it, an open-minded look at it, judging it not even by its cover, just judging the fact that it's out there in the universe to begin with. But on top of that, what I have said is, even on my own, I would not judge or form any sort of real opinion about Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film until I had seen it. Or seen something of it, something in motion, something that could give me an idea, a feel for what he's trying to do with the material. Now, when July comes, I'm going to see this film in its entirety, and I will judge it on its own merits as its own thing, and figure out if it works for me or not. But in advance, I would not write this thing off as simply like, well, fuck remakes, man. Fuck reboots. I have been willing to give this film the benefit of the doubt based off of its cast, based off of Paul Feig, based off of the fact that who wants to root for a bad Ghostbusters film to be out there in the world? Even as somebody who finds Ghostbusters 2 to just be okay, but clearly a step down from Ghostbusters, I want that train to be back on the tracks, to be doing something solid, something entertaining, something we can all enjoy. Because I love that first Ghostbusters film. I love Ivan Reitman's film. I love that cast. But guess what? They're not coming back. They tried for years to make Ghostbusters 3. 4 years. And I don't mean the number 4 years. I mean a lot of years. And they could never quite get it together. The script wasn't right. Bill Murray wasn't interested. They just could not get it together. And that's perfectly okay. They made the Ghostbusters video game, which was like Ghostbusters 3. And if that was sort of the capper, that's fine. But I find it incredibly hypocritical to find all those people who were so intent on having a Ghostbusters 3 come about to then turn around and shit all over the idea of this particular Ghostbusters film because it's not the original. Or because it's not the original cast. Or because it's not a follow-up to the originals. Nostalgia blinds people. You're still holding on to some type of feeling that you had when you were like 6 years old. And guess what? The world moves on. We can't be trapped in a moment of time trying to maintain the feeling that we had when we were much more innocent, maybe a little bit happier, and definitely smaller. We gotta move on. The world has to move on. And guess what? There's a generation that is going to grow up with this as their Ghostbusters. That doesn't mean that the original Ghostbusters is out of play. They can sure as shit still be shown it because I think that Ghostbusters is an absolute classic. But much like Star Wars The Force Awakens, which is a start of Star Wars for a new generation, that is going to be certain people's first exposure to Star Wars. This is going to be certain people's first exposure to the Ghostbusters. Now, I'm going to get back into this in a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the trailer, and then I'll get into the reaction once again. Now, once again, for me with the trailer, I've been optimistic about this film. I've been hopeful about this film. I have said to myself, I'm going to give Paul Feig and this cast with Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy and Leslie Jones and Kate McKinnon the benefit of the doubt and hope they have figured out how to put this together. Because doing something on this level and making it really good is difficult. Ghostbusters 2 didn't manage to capture the magic of Ghostbusters 1. Sometimes those films only come around once in a lifetime. And you can look at a number of quote-unquote franchises or series and find that the follow-ups just never quite match up to the originals. That doesn't mean that they can't be good, but when you start off at great, it's really hard to match that bar of excellence. So I've been hopeful that they can give me something that doesn't necessarily have to be on the level of Ivan Reitman's 1984 Ghostbusters, but should at least feel in some capacity like it belongs in the group. So I've been hopeful. I've been hopeful for this particular film. Especially in light of all the hatred that has come out for this film, with people calling it a gimmicky film, or people taking issue with the fact that there's been, that it's just a female-driven cast and crew. Hating on it in a number of ways, specifically because it is different than what they have always known the Ghostbusters to be. And so this trailer dropped at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I got up, I was up early already, and I sat down to watch it. And now, heading into the show and rolling the mics here, I have now watched the trailer on several occasions. I've watched it not necessarily like back to back, But I watched it, and then I thought about it, and then I came back and I watched it again, and then I got something to eat, and I watched it again. I think I watched it like 4 or 5 times because I didn't want to just watch it once, have sort of a knee-jerk reaction, come on here and sort of react on a high or a low. I wanted to sort of let it settle in, soak in it for a little bit before I offer up thoughts on it. And so, having prefaced my watching of the Ghostbusters trailer with my feelings on the overall film, the right to make it, and sort of how it's been received heading into a first trailer release, I can look at what Sony Pictures gave us earlier today and say that I am just not really feeling it. It's just not doing it for me. I found it to be incredibly underwhelming. But furthermore, I just didn't find it very funny. Now, what does that mean for the film in July? No, maybe nothing. I don't look at this and say, I'm super worried about this film, or come out with some sort of sky is falling mentality that fans often do about, see, look, I told you how awful this is going to be. It is well within the realm of possibilities that Paul Feig's film has held plenty back for either later trailers or the final release. I just find, having watched this trailer on several occasions, that there isn't really anything there that grabs me. I just think it's a bad trailer. That I think is actually too focused on sort of playing up the familiar of Ghostbusters, as opposed to showing me in particular why this film stands on its own. It is very clearly trying to walk this fine line between nostalgia and something new. Trying to be something to everyone. And I think that is sort of a foolish approach to make, because there are some people, period, who are just not going to get in on this movie. So to sort of play out the nostalgia, I think, only invokes much more of an angry and furious reaction than if you just showed that you're sort of doing your own thing. I mean, even right out of the get-go, right out of the gate, from the get-go, you have a sequence that is very reminiscent and similar to the library in Ghost in the original Ghostbusters. So automatically now, you have been thrown into a position that even if you were sincerely open-minded for this film, you are starting to draw comparisons and seeing parallels between the original Ghostbusters film and this Ghostbusters film. Seeing Slimer, once again, just calls upon you to remember another film and taking your attention away from this. Now, there are ways that it can be done. I think Jurassic World is a film that sort of likes to play in both worlds, the nostalgic and the new. But the problem is sort of putting forth the old in such a in-your-face sort of manner that it becomes confusing, I think, on a number of levels as to what this film is. Is it a remake? Is it a reboot? Is there a connection to the 1984 film? And I think that the film sort of jumps into too much on who these characters are and what they do without sort of setting the groundwork for our interest in who they are, period. I think that this being sort of the introduction to the new Ghostbusters is a failure on a number of levels. I think that this Ghostbusters film would have benefited a great deal with a table setter teaser trailer that maybe just focuses on the equipment, focuses on the Ecto-1, focuses on the suits, focuses on the ghosts, and sort of sets the tone that this movie is coming, so that later when a film like this occurs, or when a trailer like this occurs, where it's so much about, well, this is this particular character and their specialty, and this is this particular character and their specialty, and this is this particular character and their specialty, you sort of understand within the world that's already been set. I think visually, right now, that's one of the film's strengths. I think the ghosts look legit. There's tremendous visual effects creations. But I think really what you gotta get down to, and I don't see it here, is sort of the heart of the Ghostbusters. They can be tremendous scientists, but right now I don't get the feel of who these characters are. Now look, I realize that there's a long way to go here before July when we get this thing, and we'll get a better understanding of who these characters are and how they exist. I'm just saying, when you come out of the gate and you make it much more about the individual characters and sort of trying to explain who they are, to make it so surface level, doesn't really do your film any favors. I think the film sort of tries to play it safe in a number of ways with the humor. I think the jokes are things that I've already sort of seen before. And so there's nothing, and not necessarily in a Ghostbusters film, just that I've seen before, period. And as a result, the film doesn't really feel fresh. It feels like a bunch of cobbled together, stale bits that don't really allow the film to sort of rise up and be its own thing. At least the trailer. I'm not going to say the film. Let me rephrase it. The trailer. It doesn't allow the film depicted in the trailer to be its own thing. I'm a little bit more down on the film now today than I was yesterday. That doesn't mean that I'm all out on the film. When July comes, I'm going to sit and I'm going to watch it. And it's very plausible that I'll find a film that I'm entertained by and enjoy. It's also possible that my initial gut reaction that this doesn't look as promising as I had hoped will stand pat, will hold true. However, we'll find that out in July, not today. Now, what I take issue with surrounding this particular film is the ridiculous negative reaction coming towards Paul Feig's Ghostbusters. It is a level of vitriol and venom and hatred that is typically reserved for the most fanboyish of properties. And I look at sort of the commentary that's laid out there for a film of this nature, and I come to the understanding, I come to the realization that fanboys, which is typically the most vocal, bitchiest of all fan bases, have zero idea, zero, a big fat nil, zero idea of what they actually want. Because, let's face it, the Ghostbusters film is happening one way or the other. But the expectations that are put on a film like that, which many just say, well, I wish it never existed. Well, that's too damn bad. It's happening. So what do? They set the film up to fail one way or the other. Because if the film is too far away from the original, it's too original, it's too fresh, it's too doing its own thing, those are the people that stand up and bitch about how it isn't close to the original. That's not the Ghostbusters I know and love and remember. That's not any Ghostbusters I recognize. But guess what? On the same cycle, if the film is too close to the original, they bitch. Oh, it's not doing its own thing. Oh, it's just copying. Oh, fuck remakes. Oh, fuck reboots. Blah, blah, blah. The thing I find the most fascinating of it is people's lack of understanding that not every movie is made for them. It's not. Not every movie is made for you. Not every TV show is made for you. Not every magazine. Not every book. Not every piece of content that exists out there in the world is made for you. I know we like to think it is, because we all like to believe that we're special and the world sort of revolves around us, but not every piece of content is made specifically for you. Something like this, something like Ghostbusters, is maybe made for somebody else. And that's okay. But the fact that you are angered about the fact that it doesn't look appealing to you is fucking outrageous. Because you've, to this point, complained and complained and complained and complained. Now you've seen it, and you're going to complain and complain and complain and complain even more. Then you're going to go out of your way to watch it, so you can bitch and bitch and bitch and bitch even further. And putting all of this energy into this anger, this perceived slight against you, when other people look at this and they go, I kind of dig it. I think it looks fine. All because you believe that every movie that exists is made specifically for you. It's exclusive to you, no one else. And how dare anyone else have their own mindset, their own tastes, their own opinions that may be satisfied by a film of this nature? Let me break it down to you like this. If you look at Paul Feig's Ghostbusters and it doesn't do anything for you, that's perfectly fine. Just don't go watch it. Don't look at any further trailers. Don't buy a ticket. Just leave it alone. And move on with your life. But you can't do that, can you? You can't, for some reason, allow yourself to not be angry or pissed off about something. No one is forcing you to watch anything. No one is forcing you to watch Paul Feig's Ghostbusters. No one. No one. So if it doesn't do anything for you, just say, I don't like it, and move on. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to pour all of this energy and anger and outrage into a movie that right now, 4 months in advance, doesn't appeal to you. As if you're protesting something of some great value out there in the world. People have their own tastes when it comes to entertainment, and they're going to like what they like. And if it's different from what you like, that's okay. It doesn't invalidate your tastes. It just means get on with your fucking life. Instead of sitting around and rooting in this fucking misery that you've created for yourself over a thing that really shouldn't affect your life in any way, shape, or form. You know, I took to social media earlier this week as I watched sort of the hatred ratchet up again in advance of this Ghostbusters trailer. And I compared the people who have been so vehemently angry about this film to sort of these crazed Donald Trump supporters. And people said, I don't know that I would make that leap, that I would go that far. And to that I say, well, I am. Because it's the same idea of people who feel as if some part of their past is being invalidated, that they are being left behind as the rest of the world moves forward, as if their life is somehow being affected by other entities out there that don't actually affect their life. They feel slighted. They feel that nobody is paying attention to them. And you know what? That's okay. It's okay that that's happening. It's how you cope with it. It's how you understand and come to grips with it. And if your reaction to it is to get pissed off and angry, therapy is probably what you need. It's not another fucking movie. It's an examination of why it is that you feel so small in this world that is very large and is going to do things without you, or that aren't for you, or that primarily affect other people. When I look at this film, I see something that is out there that people are going to like and enjoy. And whether or not it connects to my sense of humor, we'll find out. But to go on and on and on about it, much like you did back when Fantastic Four came out, just fucking let it go, guys. Just let it go. Move on with your life. You're like those people that continue to dwell when their significant other breaks up with them. It's over. Get over it. Move on with your life. Because continuing to sit there and run it down and bitch about it just makes you look like a grown-up man baby than anything else. I think Ghostbusters has a bad trailer. I'm still hopeful that they're able to have something a little bit more substantial to it. But looking at the trailer right now, I just did not find it to be very funny. I did not find it to be sort of just a crowd-rousing moment. I found it to be a little bit flat. We'll see how we get as we move closer to July. Those are sort of my impressions on what we got from Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film earlier today, as well as the reaction that continues to surround it and continues to build. All right, I want to talk about the Oscars because I think some of it also ties in to what it was that I was talking about with Ghostbusters, which is this idea that everything has to be for everyone. A lot of controversy heading into the Oscars this year. The Oscars so white hashtag and campaign really sort of permeating throughout society. A lot of people paying attention and taking notice of what was going on with the Academy Awards this year with sort of the lack of diversity, and then the Academy's reaction to trying to increase and promote diversity within their membership. Chris Rock was the host. And coming out, you had to know that Chris Rock was going to address the elephant in the room, that he was going to take on sort of Hollywood's race relations. And he did. Now, whether or not you found some of it to be poignant, whether or not you found some of it to be sharp, whether or not you found some of it to be true or funny, so be it. That is sort of what it is. I thought that Chris Rock did a pretty solid job of hitting certain points, whether it was the outrage campaign or sort of the Hollywood problem of race. I found that stuff to be pretty solid. What then happened, though, that I have found watching it, is that people go out of their way to look for something that they can complain and be unhappy about. As if this was their Oscars. Oh, they complained that this person got played off stage during their speech, but not this person. Oh, they complained that this person didn't get to perform, but this person did. Oh, they complained that it was the categories were handed out in this order and not that order. It's always something. You look for something to have a problem with. Well, guess what? If you would like your award ceremony to be structured a particular way, then you can go out and create your own fucking award ceremony. I have found that the people who are the most unhappiest during the Academy Awards are typically the people who take the Academy Awards so seriously. If you just sort of watch it as entertainment and maybe, let me see who won, you'll be fine. That's what I watched it for. I don't put any real stock in the Oscars. I don't accept the Oscars as sort of the be-all and end-all of what is great in the film on a particular year. I have my own top 10 list to do that. I watch it just to see how it's going to go. I watch it to see how some of the segments are going to go. I watch it really sort of for entertainment value, not as sort of some really serious examination and representation of the year prior in film. So when I watch things and things may not necessarily go my way, much like with the Ghostbusters trailer, I just sort of roll on with my life. Now, I know there was some people who took issue with some of Chris Rock's comments, some of the segments, some of the jokes. And here's the deal. Chris Rock is a comedian. And I think right now we're in a time where people are incredibly sensitive to the point where they have now forgotten what a comedian does. A comedian tells jokes about everyone. An equal offender. They don't take off when it comes to making jokes about Asians or women or blacks or gays. Everyone is an equal target under the crosshairs of a comedian. Particularly a stand-up comedian, and particularly one who's been at it long enough and knows what they're doing, like Chris Rock. So I find it incredibly humorous when somebody will watch a stand-up performance by a comedian and laugh and laugh and laugh at all the jokes that they're making about everybody else, but the second that the mirror and the sights are turned on their particular group, I can't believe he said that. That's not funny. That's off limits. That's crossing a line. No, it's not. It's not crossing a line. There are very few lines that a comedian should be afraid to cross. Because if that's the case and we put restrictions on what comedians can and can't talk about, then they cease to be comedians. You may not necessarily find it funny, and I'm sorry for that you may not have a sense of humor about those particular things. But if you're easily offended by the jokes that a comedian might make about a particular group, if you're a part of that group, then maybe stand-up comedy just not for you. And I look at something here with the Academy Awards, and once again, I say to myself, people don't know what they want. What do they want a host to be? What do they believe the role of a host is? Because if they want just somebody to move it along and introduce presenters and move from award to award, then they watch the film, they watch the presentation, they watch the ceremony, they watch the Oscars, and they say, well, that was kind of boring. Wasn't entertaining enough. And yet when you have a comedian who comes out and cracks jokes, then they look at it and they go, oh, well, I thought it should have been more serious. I didn't find those jokes to be funny. Shouldn't we have moved on to something else a little bit less like that? You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. There's a no-win situation there. And look, I understand. You want fucking Billy Crystal again. It can't always be Billy Crystal. When it's a comedian, you complain. Because in many ways, the comedians also aren't allowed to go full-blown what makes the comedian the comedian. A lot of times they gotta scale it back. They gotta soften it in order to make it for a mainstream audience. But you also don't want a showman either. When you had somebody like Neil Patrick Harris or Seth MacFarlane, people looked at it and they go, I don't like that either. I understand that Billy Crystal was there once upon a time. And you remember liking it. But the same thing, nostalgia is a problem when you are just holding on to trying to maintain a particular feeling for the rest of your life. We gotta keep going. We gotta evolve. There has to be something else to explore, to feel, to emote. And it can't just be, well, this is how I felt when I was 7 and I'm going to try and hold on to that forever. As far as the Oscars themselves were concerned, I thought everything was fine. I was really excited to see Mad Max sort of dominate the technical categories and get recognition from the Academy as a film that typically the Academy would never recognize at the Oscars. With the way everything was going, I was wondering whether or not Mad Max Fury Road could actually be a player in the Best Picture category, because with all of the technical acknowledgments that it was getting, how can you then sort of make the argument that it's not the Best Picture? When all of the pieces that it's getting rewarded as best are what makes it a picture. That said, I thought Spotlight was fine as a Best Picture winner. I watched Spotlight actually with my wife last night, again revisiting it. And while it may not be as showy as some of the other films, Spotlight is a really solid film that tells, I think, a really important story. So Spotlight as Best Picture, I'm perfectly fine with. I find it remarkably entertaining that there were people going out of their way to actively root against The Revenant. Once again, as if The Revenant possibly winning a Best Picture somehow invalidates your feelings on the film. While at the same time, watching people outright celebrate Leonardo DiCaprio's win. A hilarious reaction to this guy that people don't know, that people only perceive in some fantastical way, but to sort of watch the way that people responded to Leonardo DiCaprio winning Best Actor for The Revenant, I thought was truly hilarious. As if they had won the Oscar themselves. By and large, I thought the show was fine. I thought it actually flew through at a relatively brisk pace, considering that the show was still about 3.5 hours. But it never really seemed to drag, never really seemed to have too much unnecessary fat on it like some other of their shows do, as they sort of try to tell some kind of stories. I thought the story that they told here, as far as this is the process of filmmaking, starting with the script, going all the way through the Best Picture, I thought that was a pretty solid way to present the awards. So in that way, using that to sort of weave some sort of interconnected thread throughout the night, I thought that was a pretty interesting way to do it, as opposed to like, well, we're just going to show video packages of all these movies of action films or comedies or whatever. I thought the night moved fairly well. Whoa, Chris Rock as a host, would I have him back? Yeah, why not? I didn't think he was bad. I thought some of his comments, especially early on, were pretty striking. I would have liked there to see just a little bit of movement off of some of the race stuff, because I think it was, after a while, just sort of beating a dead horse. And I know that Chris Rock is pretty versatile in his observations and his comedy, that I would have liked to see him sort of diversify his portfolio, I guess. But beyond that, can't really knock the Oscars too much. Thought it was an alright show. I know the ratings were down, but I've seen better, I've seen worse. It sort of is what it is. It's the Oscars. The pageantry is what gets everybody excited. And, you know, now that it's gone, let the early Oscar predicting for next year begin to commence. Based off of no real knowledge whatsoever. Just a lot of guessing based off of pedigree. So that's sort of my comments on the Oscars. Those are my earlier comments on the Ghostbusters. And that makes this particular show come to a close. I want to thank you for listening this particular week. Again, as usual, make sure you follow all our social media accounts. Hit us up on Twitter at JTW Podcast. That's the official Twitter handle of Just the Worst Podcast. So anytime we put a brand new episode up, you'll be sure to be notified if you're following that Twitter account. So at JTW Podcast. At Tis Infamous, that's TIS Infamous, that's the official Twitter handle of the mothership. This is Infamous. So as we continue to rebuild the brand, rebuild the site, and get everything up and running, that's where you're going to get all your information from as far as when we finally pull the trigger there. So at Tis Infamous, make sure you follow that. Myself, at Infamous Kid, with 2 Ds at the end, for all of my random ramblings and musings that I put up on the Twittersphere. Make sure you follow me there for whatever observations it is that I really want to make throughout any given day. That's where you're going to get the most instant gratification as far as I am concerned. Over on Facebook, Facebook.com/JustTheWorstPodcast, Facebook.com/TisInfamous, and Facebook.com/BillyTheKid. Plenty of information always goes up there as well. Lots of interactivity. So just fight through those complicated Facebook algorithms. Make sure you visit those pages, and you'll get a lot of good stuff coming to you as well. All the podcasts can be found at SoundCloud.com. That's SoundCloud.com/JustTheWorstPodcast. Also, if you have yourself a mobile device or tablet, you hop on and get the SoundCloud app. And this way, as a subscriber to all of our podcasts, you'll be able to get every single show and every single episode delivered to the palm of your hands. So whether it's your cell phone, whether it's your tablet, you're going to get it right to you. So make sure, once again, SoundCloud.com/JustTheWorstPodcast, or get it all on the SoundCloud app. You can find my work on a regular basis at JoeBlow.com. This is Infamous, and right here at Just the Worst Podcast. This has been Just the Worst Podcast, episode number 25. I have been your host, Billy Donnelly, and I will see you back here next week talking about some more stuff. So in the meantime, you have yourself a pleasant immediate future. I'm out for now. Peace. Just the Worst Podcast, episode number 25, has been a presentation of Just the Worst Podcast.